So, what do you do when you need a haircut and you're out in the desert? Our normal work arrangement was 3 weeks in the desert, 1 week back in Benghazi, where you could get a haircut. But I'd been out there an extended period of time, and I really needed one. It was that or a dog tag. But anyway, we were in a particular drilling camp, and I just happened to comment that I needed a haircut. And one of the rig hands said, "Well, you can get it right here in camp. We have a guy that cuts hair." I said, "Really?" "Yep." He said, "You got to take a 6-pack of beer to his trailer on Wednesday night when he does haircuts, and then you have to stay for the discussion." I said, "Well, I just want a haircut." And he said, "Well, if you want the haircut, you have to bring your 6-pack of beer and stay for the discussion." I said, "What's the discussion about?" And he said, "You just need to go." So this was rather puzzling, but I got my 6-pack of beer, went to Charlie and Zach's trailer. Charlie was a rig mechanic, and Zach was the rig welder. Both these men were British. They were both craftsmen. As far as I knew, they didn't have any particular formal education beyond high school. But I showed up. There were 3 or 4 other guys waiting for haircuts. Took an hour or so before they could cut our hair. I was the last one. After he finished cutting, he said, "Well, it's time for our discussion." And I just couldn't imagine what we were going to discuss. But Charlie said, "Tonight we're going to discuss Shakespeare's works, but not particularly one of his works. We're going to talk about the big question, which is, did Shakespeare write the Shakespearean works, or did Francis Bacon write them?" Well, I didn't even know there was a conflict over who wrote them, but apparently it's a big deal. There are some literary scholars who say Shakespeare didn't write those works, but others did, and that discussion that night was about Francis Bacon. I sat there amazed. Charlie and Zach had a real deep knowledge of Shakespearean literature. I had been through formal education, including a college degree. All I remembered from high school was we had to read Macbeth, and I hated it. And I don't think I read more than a few pages before I quit. But here were Zach and Charlie leading a discussion, a really good discussion about the nature of Shakespeare's works. Well, what can I say about that? Well, it was an eye-opener. And I thought of myself as being somewhat uneducated after that experience. It wasn't something that changed me at the moment, but later, after I left Libya and moved on into the rest of my life, that experience welled up several times. I'll share later the effect of that. But it does raise some questions. Is it important to know things about Shakespearean literature? Is there value in reading the works of the past? Well, from my vantage point today, I'd say yes, it is. That the whole Western intellectual tradition rests on many of those writers from the past. They're worthy of keeping, but we have to study them. We have to be conversant with that literary tradition if we're going to keep it. And I think it's worth keeping. What's interesting, there is an old expression, "Don't judge a book by its cover." I think when I walked into the trailer with Zach and Charlie, I probably did not anticipate a discussion on Shakespeare. The fact of the matter is, what is an educated person? What is the real definition of an educated person? Well, we in America would say, well, somebody's gone through secondary education, went on to college, maybe beyond that. But the more I've thought about it, the more I realize that the educated person is certainly benefited by formal education, but he or she is someone who has undertaken on their own steam to investigate things like literature, their own study. And here are Zach and Charlie, guys that had a deep interest in things intellectual and pursued them. That's an educated person.